On this week's episode of FAS TV, we head to the Isle of Taransay to meet Angus Mackay, who grazes his Pedigree Aberdeen Angus cattle throughout the summer on the island. And we hear from Azets Accountants about managing your finances to run your business successfully for yourself and future generations. On the Isle of Harris, we head back to visit Angus Mackay and his Pedigree herd of Aberdeen Angus cattle. During the summer months, Angus requires additional grazing for his young stock, which he fattens on farm. When the opportunity came up to graze this group on the Isle of Taransay, Angus was quick to take it up.
Well, we're out on the island of Taransay, which is off the west coast of Harris, 2.5 miles off the mainland of Harris. Well, that's just your Atlantic out there. No, there's nothing else behind us, and you couldn't be in a better place. We started in 2014. It was just a wee idea myself and my wife had to start it was something that I had an interest in anyway, in Pedigree Angus. Aberdeen Angus was always my favourite breed. We did have a small herd of seminal crosses first. We started off with that in 2011 or thereabouts, and then we decided to disperse them, and we bought our first Blaylock cow with calf at foot in 2014, and we just went from there. We've got 15 bulling at the bowl at the moment. Yeah, and these are last year's calves, which are out here for the summer months. Yeah. Oh, I've been coming out since. Well, my father bought it in 1964, and I was born in 1964. I've got my first recollection probably when I was 3 or 4 years old. I had ties with Taransay anyway. The owners of Taransay now, they were looking for cattle to graze it, so I just took the opportunity of taking them across and it works out for both parties.
For moving the cattle between Taransay and Harris, Angus had access to a landing craft. However, moving the cattle is very much dependent on the weather.
Well, we've got the luxury of using the Border Lodge landing craft to get them on and off. They've been on here since March, beginning of March. They come on in the beginning of March and they'll be going off in October. Yeah, because last year we were caught out with the weather. The weather got really bad in October, November, and it was actually 30th of January we got them off. We had a beautiful day taking them off, and if we hadn't got them off that day, it would have struggled into the following year. It's a lot of pretty rough ground, but there's quite a lot of macha ground, and the cattle tend to stick to the macha ground. They do take occasional walk up to the heather, but 90% of the time they're on the macha ground. The benefit that the estate gets out of it is that the land is grazed, a minimal graze on the macha grounds especially. I don't know how much, they don't do a lot out on the hillside, but they do on the machas, which they help with the marron grass, and that keeps the marron grass young. It'll stop erosion for a start, yeah, because the marron grass keeps the sand in place.
What's the benefit to Angus of using the island for summer grazing?
Well, to me, I've got summer grazing for them, and they're up to their knees in grass, which I couldn't have at home. I couldn't keep that amount of stock at home. But to have the benefit, the luxury of getting them out to an island with 3,500 acres for them to roam, I couldn't refuse. This is the second year, and they're performing very well. Yes, they've put on. They're probably double their weight in that space, because I weighed them the day they came across, and they were weighing in at over 400 kilos then, so I'm hoping they'll probably put on maybe up to 600 kilos. Well, they'll be sitting at about 600 kilos when they get back off, hopefully.
Once the cattle come off the island, Angus takes them onto the mainland to put them through the market. Angus has recently started doing performance recording on the herd.
At the moment it's Dingle. We put them through last year's bullocks fat stock. We put them through the fat stock ring in Dingle, which worked out very well for us. We were really pleased with them. They were actually a bit overweight. That was the only complaint that I had about them. But otherwise, I think they killed out very well. We've just started recording. We were too late in doing these ones to keep an accurate record of them every 100 days. But we started on this year's calves, recording them, but we need to get them scanned as well for tissue, for fat tissue and all that, which I need to get somebody from the mainland to come in to do that, which is going to put another expense on. So there's pros and cons. I bought my own weighing scales through a CAGS grant. And that's just come in just after the new year, so I've just started recording that. So ideally it's every 100 days to keep an accurate record, which is not easy to do when they're out here. So I don't know how to get over that hurdle. Get plenty of help from the Aberdeen Angus Cattle Society. Yeah, I get all the information from them, which is very helpful, and they'll help you in any way they can.
As with all agricultural businesses, the rise in input costs is affecting farming on the Isle of Harris, where there's the additional challenge of being on an island.
I think it probably will have extra costs anyway on the mainland of Harris, with feedstuffs, fuel, seeds, fertilisers and all that. I mean, at the moment we've got the luxury of having these over here at no cost for the summer. They're more or less eating organic grass, you know, there's nothing on the ground, there's no fertilisers or anything over here. But at home, with the cost of fertilisers and that, we'd do our own silage, we'd try and get enough to winter our own stock. So we need to put fertilisers down for that, and that's been a huge, it's doubled in price since last year. We're holding out at the moment, but I think I might need to reduce the stock a wee bit, because I'm just maybe carrying too many at the moment. The wintering is easy enough in a way, you know, you can budget your wintering, but it's a summering. I think you need more grass in the summer it's more important for them to get the grass in the summer than, you know, in the winter you can gauge what they need to eat, but in the summer they need to have a vast area of ground, and I don't have that at home for cows with calves at foot, you know, so. And to have these out here is that's a big benefit. I would really love to get the meat processed and packed on the island in Stornoway. That was what we were planning on doing last year with the bullocks that we had here, but unfortunately we were too late in getting them off with the weather. We'd never got them off till the last week in December, which the slaughterhouse in Stornoway was closed by then. So then we had to carry them on until near the spring. And we put them through then the fat string in Stornoway, in Dingwall, sorry. But I would really love to pack them and sell them as Scarasta beef.
Managing your finances is an important part of running a successful farming business. Working closely with your accountant will help you to structure both day-to-day and long-term decision-making, and can pay dividends when considering specific financial matters.
Hello, my name's Ian Craig. I'm a partner with Azets Accountants in Perth. So Azets is a national firm with offices throughout the UK. Perth office has a few specialisms, but one of them is rural business and agriculture. So we do all the standard services you would expect from your accountant, but we're also quite involved in tax advisory and succession planning for farmers. My background is I was brought up on a livestock farm just outside Dunfermline in Fife, before studying land economy at Aberdeen University. And then I went on to do my CA training. And I now, as well as my accounting and tax work, I live in a small holding just outside Perth and look after a small flock of North Country Cheviot sheep.
Hi, I'm Amy Burton. I'm a senior manager with Azets Accountants in their Perth office. I work in the rural team. So I've got a portfolio mainly made up of farmers, estate owners, and then just some other businesses that work within the agricultural industry. In terms of Azets and what we do, or what I do on a day-to-day basis, so we offer an end-to-end service, so whether that be doing the day-to-day processing of transactions, so preparing their VAT returns, all the way through to preparing a set of accounts and then doing their tax returns and working out tax liabilities. I'm from a dairy farm originally, from Crossgates in Fife, and I moved to Kinross about 3 years ago. And after studying maths and accounts at university, went on to start working with Campbell Dallas at the time, now Azets, and did my professional accountancy exams with them. So I've been there for a total of 8 years now.
Succession planning in agriculture is an important but complex matter. Seeking professional advice from an accountant will help you to assess your assets and make provision for the next generation.
Succession planning means different things to a lot of different farming situations. It can be as simple as bringing a member of the younger generation into the farming business. It can be transferring land down a generation, or it could be potentially taking an existing business and splitting it into two different businesses, perhaps with two siblings going in their own separate ways. It's important in agriculture because farming is a very long-term business. It's not, although it runs in annual cycles, it takes a long time to build up the farm, and it's important that it's passed on appropriately. It's people's homes, so it's not just like any other business that perhaps is, away from their where they live. It's part of their lifestyle, and there's a lot of history built up in farming businesses. So it's really important to get it right. Succession planning can be quite a complex mix of tax, valuation, legal matters, and financial matters. And thrown into the mix, it's usually intertwined with a lot of emotion, and therefore it's quite important for advisors to be sensitive to all those things. A good time to start the conversation, I often think we're quite fortunate as accountants because we are in the unique position that clients need to speak to us every year, often more than once a year, but at the very least once a year. And therefore we can have that opportunity to initiate the questions. In terms of actually when is a good time to start it, it varies from person to person. Some farmers are more comfortable on the farm in their own environment. Others are maybe find there are too many distractions at home and actually prefer to have a discussion in the office. There's a few triggers to succession planning. Some of them are forced upon a family, whether that be perhaps ill health or a dispute within the family, or perhaps more commonly people wanting to start making provision for the next generation, and that the next generation is often not just the farming children, but the other children that are perhaps off the farm, and to make provision for those. So the process for carrying out a financial appraisal, I usually start with a set of up-to-date accounts, and then I would look to see if there is a partnership agreement or perhaps a shareholders agreement if it's a limited company. I'd have a look at those. I would have a look at the cash and the debt position to determine what sort of level of indebtedness there is with a bank. I would then look for, try and get an understanding of how many hectares are involved in the farm. Is it more than one holding? Where do the family live on the farm? Are they living in the farmhouse or the cottages? I would then sit down with the client, and although accountants are not qualified to value assets, that's a job of a land agent. We would normally kind of work up a sort of crude assessment of the asset values involved, and we'd look to bring in the solicitor at a fairly early stage in these discussions. Inheritance tax is a tax that applies to someone's estate on death. Within agriculture, there is a few reliefs, quite generous reliefs available to farmers. So the first one is business property relief, which covers all the non-property assets, typically likes of your stock, machinery, and perhaps some cash in the bank. And agricultural property relief that covers the property assets. So it's quite important when talking about inheritance tax with farmers that you get an understanding of the assets involved. So I would generally start with sort of an inventory of the farmer's assets, and that would not just include the farming assets, but any assets held out with the business, and then almost go down them and work out a sort of rough estate value, establish what reliefs are available, and then if there is a residue that doesn't qualify for any reliefs, then we'd look to see if it's covered by the inheritance tax nil rate band, which is 325,000. So that would be my starting point. And if there is assets that are exposed to IHT, I suppose it's useful for the family to understand what that potential liability is, and then make plans around what they could possibly do to protect themselves against an inheritance tax liability. There is various tax implications on the transfer of assets in lifetime. So the first thing that really comes to mind is capital gains tax. So if you're transferring an asset to a family member, that is a chargeable disposal for capital gains. What we would look to try and do is utilise a different form of relief that's relating to capital gains tax called holdover relief. However, holdover relief only applies to assets that are used in your trade of farming. As farm businesses have expanded and diversified into other areas that are not core agriculture, we need to be quite careful on claiming that relief and to determine what assets may and may not qualify. So an example of a non-qualifying asset for holdover relief would be a let cottage. So possibly in the past that cottage has been occupied by an employee, and that would be fine even in current times to transfer. But if it's now let to a third party, then that would be a chargeable disposal for CGT. So it's really a question of kind of going through the assets and putting them in different buckets as to, determining whether they qualify for that relief or not.
What advice would you give to farmers who may not have an immediate successor to the business?
So if a farmer is looking to exit farming, retire at age with no successors coming behind them, the key things I would look at to start with is capital gains tax. So if you're ceasing farming, you would generally be eligible to claim a relief called business asset disposal relief. So that requires basically you to own land and to cease trading at the same time. There is a lifetime limit for a business asset disposal relief of £1 million. So you may have a scenario where there's a sole trade farmer has owned the land and trades in his own right, but you'd probably want to, with a bit of warning of at least 2 years, to look at his spouse's situation and potentially transfer land to a spouse and make sure that the spouse was also involved in the business and partnership before the sale, in order to effectively get two lots of business asset disposal relief, because it's the same lifetime limit that applied to the husband would also equally apply to his wife. Other things that are important are income tax. So quite often when you go to sell the farm, you have a farm sale, sell all the machinery, sell all the livestock, so there's quite a large profit in the final year of trade. So you'd also want to look at things like pension contributions, perhaps to try and alleviate some of the higher rate income tax liabilities. And possibly the key thing that farmers need to be aware of in that scenario is that when they're a farmer and all their assets are tied up in land in a farming business, there is fairly generous IHT reliefs available. But of course, once you sell the farm and pay your capital gains tax, the proceeds are then typically invested, whether that just sitting in the bank or perhaps invested in stocks or shares. So those assets don't qualify for IHT relief. So you could be in a position where you take a valuable asset and put it into an alternative asset that doesn't get any relief. And in those scenarios, I suppose you want to think about things like lifetime gifting, depending on the age of the farmer, and also perhaps some sort of life assurance to protect yourself against the IHT liability, or simply equalising estates with their spouse, which might help. It probably wouldn't eradicate the liability, but might help reduce it.
There are multiple bookkeeping systems available for farmers and crofters to help manage their finances.
So in terms of bookkeeping systems for farmers, there's no sort of one-stop shop when it comes to them. It really depends on the farming business itself, who's going to be processing the books, and what the client or the farmer wants to get out of the software, whether that's just basic processing or whether they want to get detailed reporting out at the end. The main ones we see getting used on a day-to-day basis are probably Xero, Sage, Landmark, Key Prime, and Farm Plan. If you're looking for, or if you have sort of multiple enterprises, Landmark's quite a good one to deal with those. It's also good when it comes to stock valuations and reporting functionality and preparing budgets. But really the main one that we probably see getting used is Xero. I think probably because it's the most user-friendly. We use it actually internally at Azets as well for preparing VAT returns. It's quite good that you've got that real-time data. It's useful for both the client and us that we can see the data sort of in real time and see exactly what they're seeing, so that if they need a hand with anything, we're able to do that. And even though it's not farm specific, it seems to do the basic job that most farmers are looking for.
Is there anything farmers should consider when purchasing assets and machinery? Are there any allowances available? And what about the timing of these purchases?
So we get asked this question quite a lot about purchasing plant and machinery and the timing of those purchases. So it quite often comes up when the farmer thinks they've maybe made a good profit in a year. So they'll come to us and say, do you think we need to be investing in some plant and machinery right now? And really, as much as it is a tax, you get tax relief on the cost of the purchase. It's also considering on the cash flow side of things, how you're going to pay for that asset, whether you're going to buy it outright or on hire purchase, and really considering all the options so that we're not just purely basing it on a tax decision. So that conversation usually comes up though towards the end of an accounting period for a client. So they'll maybe come to us within 1 or 2 months of the year end, say, right, we think we've made a good profit, so we're looking to buy some plant and machinery. And just specifically with the way things are at the minute, just need to consider the lead time on ordering those assets and when they'll actually arrive. Because to qualify for that relief, the asset actually needs to be on farm by the year end. It's not just based on the invoice date that we can claim that relief. So farmers averaging is a great election that we can use for farmers. So it used to be that farmers had the option to average their current year taxable profits with the prior year, so you could average those 2 years. A few years ago they brought in that you could also average over 5 years, so the current profits, taxable profits, with the previous 4 years. So it's quite useful for farmers because their profits can fluctuate quite a lot year on year. So it's a useful way of smoothing out those profit levels over 2 or 5 years, and potentially if they've had to pay higher rate tax in a previous year, potentially getting to reclaim some of that tax that they've previously paid if we've managed to reduce the average profits over that period of time. We look at it on an annual basis for all our clients. It is quite time consuming, but as I say, it's really beneficial. And in order to qualify, that difference between the profits needs to be 25% before we can even consider averaging. Unfortunately, it's not available where the main trade is not farming itself, and also it's not available for agricultural contractors or in the first or last year of trading. The main new rule that's going to be coming into play in the next few years is something called the basis period reform. So at the moment, farmers are currently, and this is for uncorporated businesses, so partnerships or sole traders. So at the moment they are taxed on the profits for their accounting period that falls in that current tax year. So say you had a 30th of November year end 22, that would fall into the tax year ending 5th of April 2023. So we would have quite a long period of time to prepare those accounts and prepare the tax returns for that year, because it's based on 2022, and the tax return for that period wouldn't be due until the following January, so January 24. So that's quite useful at the moment, but the new rule that's coming in is that your profits are going to be based on the tax year itself. So even if you have a 30th of November year end, you'll have to work out the 8 months profits, say to the 30th of November 22, and then probably have to estimate the 4 months to 30th of November 23 in order to still submit that same tax return by the same January 2024. So it's just really making people aware of that, speaking to your accountant early on what your options are, considering.
If you have any financial queries, speak to your accountant or contact us via the Farm Advisory Service helpline.
Here we are already into August. How quickly is that summer gone? And in recent weeks we've had great, lovely warm weather. It's been great for grass growth, it's been great for us on our summer holidays. And the animals undoubtedly have enjoyed it too, but we have to watch out for signs of heat stress when we do get these extreme temperatures. And in years to come it's likely that we will get more extreme temperatures, so heat stress is something to look out for. Ruminants in particular are very prone to heat stress. They obviously have a massive rumen inside them that produces a lot of heat. So when the weather is lovely and the temperatures go up, then they can suffer. The main way that they show it is reduced intakes, particularly in dairy cows, so there may be a consequential reduction in milk yield because of it. Things we can do to make sure there's minimal disturbance because of the heat. Obviously make sure your animals have free access to plenty of good clean water. If you've got stock outside that are relying on natural water sources such as streams or ponds, make sure they don't dry up. If they don't dry up completely, keep an eye that there are no algae growing on them. So we've had reports of cattle with suspected algal toxicity throughout the hot weather. So this is where algae blooms on the water, the cattle obviously ingest it and there's toxins that are released. And we see signs such as ataxia, so incoordination, colic signs, so abdominal pain, sort of kicking at their stomachs, that sort of thing, and sudden death as well. So if you have any concerns about that, then make sure these areas are cordoned off and they have access to an alternative source of water. Another thing that is a consequence of the lovely hot weather is that all the worm larvae on the pastures have arrested development when it's been super, super hot. But then we get lovely bits of rain, it really freshens up the grass, but it also causes all the worm larvae to emerge at the same time. So what we then end up with is massive contamination of pasture. And if you have young stock that were turned out in the spring, maybe with a persistent wormer on board, we're getting to the stage now where that will be running out. So they're now not covered by any protection and they've got access to a massive, massive burden of larvae on the pasture. And we see this as scouring mainly, so calves in their first grazing season that are scouring could be worms. The other thing could be is coccidiosis, and both of these obviously have different treatments, but both of them can really substantially affect production and sort of cause massive weight gain. Scours can also kill animals as well. So if you see scouring calves in your fields, then you want to be speaking with your vet to take some samples and check exactly what's going on, because you don't want to be treating them for worms when they've got coccidiosis and vice versa. Coccidiosis as well, it's really important that we check what type of coccidiosis are there, because many of them are not pathogenic, and even though they're there will not be causing disease, so don't necessarily need treatment. So it's really important we check that there are pathogenic ones there before you administer any treatment. We've also had some post-mortems in on older cattle, and we've had many phone reports of older cattle speaking to vets and farmers that are scouring at grass, which is quite an unusual presentation. We usually think of adult cows as going out to grass being immune to worms, but we have had recent reports of quite a few cases where they've been scouring, wasting away and even dying, and they're the ones that we've had into post-mortem. And we've had confirmed and suspected in a lot of cases that these adult cows are suffering from what we call type 2 osteoarteriosis. So this is where last grazing period they've ingested some larvae, probably to the end of the grazing season, and instead of continuing the life cycle, these larvae have become encysted and inhibited in their development, and they burrow into the abomasal mucosa, so into the stomach mucosa, where they sit all winter. And often we classically think of type 2 osteoarteriosis as being later in the housing periods that we see outbreaks, but we are seeing outbreaks in the summer. So a little bit of stress, such as heat stress, could cause all these larvae to emerge. and basically it just really damages the stomach mucosa and causes them to scour. But crucially, this dung that they're producing doesn't have any eggs in it, because it's the larvae coming out of the stomach mucosa that's causing the damage. So that's a key point of diagnosis, is that these cows will be scouring, losing condition, but there are no eggs in the faeces. So it's easy to test them and think, oh, it's not worms that's causing the problem, but it still could be. There are a couple of blood tests that your vet could do to confirm it. So it's really important, if you have older scouring cattle, speak to your vet, get it investigated, because not all wormers will cover the inhibited larvae. So it's really important you pick one to do the job, to treat them appropriately. So hopefully the nice weather will continue, and we'll get a good harvest, and we'll see what comes along in the next few weeks.